The emergency beacon cut through the night sky above New Phoenix Station like a desperate scream. Jake Morrison wiped grease from his hands with an old rag, squinting up at the streaking light that seemed to be heading straight for his workshop. 23 years of fixing everything from atmosphere processors to hyperdrive cores had taught him to recognize distress signals. But this one felt different. More urgent. More afraid. The crash shook the entire building. Tools rattled off workbenches, and the half-repaired mining crawler in Bay 3 groaned on its supports. Jake grabbed his emergency kit and ran outside, expecting to find twisted metal and tragedy. Instead, he found something that made him question his sanity. A creature the size of a small starship lay crumpled beside his workshop. Its scales shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, each one larger than Jake's hand. Massive wings, torn and bleeding, stretched across his parking area. But what stopped Jake's breath was the smaller figure cradled in those powerful arms. Another dragon, this one silver and white, lay motionless against the larger creature's chest. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and even from 20 feet away, Jake could see the life fading from her luminous eyes. The larger dragon lifted its head, ancient amber eyes, filled with intelligence and desperate hope, fixed on Jake. When it spoke, the words came in perfect standard galactic, though the voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Please, I know what you're thinking. We are monsters to you. But she is dying. I have traveled 7 systems to find someone who might help where our greatest healers have failed." Jake approached slowly, his engineer's mind already cataloging injuries. The silver dragon's life signs were weak, her elegant form marred by some kind of energy burn that seemed to be eating at her from within. The larger dragon's own wounds were severe, but he had ignored them completely in favor of protecting his mate. "What happened to her?" Jake asked, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. "Energy cascade failure in her bioneural matrix. Our healers call it cascade death. There is no cure. She is perhaps hours before her life force burns out completely." The dragon's voice cracked with grief. "I am Corvain of the Celestial Reach. This is Lyralii, light of my stars. I have heard stories of human ingenuity, wild tales of your kind accomplishing impossible things through methods our science cannot comprehend." Jake knelt beside the silver dragon. Her scales felt warm, but underneath he could sense the chaotic energy that was killing her. It reminded him of feedback loops he had seen in overtaxed power cores, except this was happening in a living being. "Why did you come to me specifically?" "I'm just a mechanic." Corvain's massive head lowered until he was nearly eye level with Jake. 3 cycles ago, you repaired a Zealith cargo hauler with a method our engineers called impossible. You bypassed 17 safety protocols and jury-rigged a solution using scrap metal and determination. The Zealith pilot spoke of you with something approaching worship. Jake remembered the job. The hauler's main drive had been completely fried, and the only replacement parts were 6 weeks away. He had used components from 3 different manufacturers and some creative rewiring to get the ship running again. The Zealith pilot had paid triple his usual fee and left shaking his head in amazement. That was just problem solving. Jake gestured at Lyralii. "This is way beyond my expertise." "No," Corvain said firmly. "Your expertise is thinking beyond the boundaries that limit others. Our healers see only what should work according to our knowledge. You see what could work if one ignores conventional wisdom." Jake studied the dying dragon more carefully. Her bioneural matrix was essentially a living computer processing life force the way his machines processed energy. The cascade failure was like a virus corrupting her operating system, except the virus was made of pure destructive force. "I need to understand how our systems work, and I need access to equipment I don't have." Corvain's eyes brightened with the first hope Jake had seen. "Anything you require. My ship carries the finest medical and technical equipment from 12 worlds. My personal wealth is considerable. Name any price." "It's not about money," Jake said, standing and dusting off his knees. It's about whether I can figure out how to debug a living being like she's a malfunctioning computer. He looked around his workshop, filled with half-finished projects and jury-rig solutions. Every successful repair had started with someone telling him it was impossible. The Atmosphere processor that everyone said was beyond salvage. The hyperdrive that 3 certified technicians had declared unrepairable. The mining equipment that had been written off as a total loss. "Let's get her inside," Jake said finally. "And let's see what happens when human stubbornness meets alien biotechnology." Corvain carefully lifted his mate, moving with surprising gentleness for such a massive creature. Jake cleared his largest bay, pushing aside equipment and making room for both dragons. As he worked, his mind was already racing through possibilities. Dragon biology was supposed to be beyond human understanding. Their life force operated on principles that human science barely recognized. But Jake had spent 2 decades making things work that shouldn't work, combining incompatible technologies through sheer determination and creative thinking. "Corvain, I need you to understand something," Jake said as they settled Lyralii on a padded platform. "I'm not a doctor. I'm not even trained in alien biology. What I am is someone who fixes things by ignoring what everyone says is impossible." "That is precisely why I brought her to you," Corvain replied. "Our greatest minds say she cannot be saved because they limit themselves to what is known. You might save her because you will attempt what is unknown." Jake nodded, pulling on his work gloves. "Then, let's get started. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this business, it's that everything can be fixed. You just have to be willing to think sideways." He began connecting diagnostic equipment to Lyralii, adapting sensors designed for machinery to work with living tissue. The readings that came back were unlike anything in his experience, but patterns were patterns. Energy was energy, and chaos, whether in a machine or a living being, followed certain rules. As Jake worked, Corvain watched with growing amazement. The humans' approach was nothing like their traditional healing methods. Instead of trying to force Lyralii's bineural matrix back into proper alignment, Jake was studying the cascade failure itself, mapping its patterns like he would trace a short circuit in a damaged power core. "Tell me about her matrix," Jake said, not looking up from his readings. "How does it normally process life force?" "Through crystalline nodes that channel energy in specific harmonic frequencies. The cascade failure has disrupted those harmonics, creating chaotic resonance that grows stronger with each pulse of her heartbeat." Jake nodded thoughtfully. Chaotic resonance. He had dealt with something similar in a damaged reactor core last year. The solution had been counterintuitive, but effective. "What if we don't try to stop the chaos?" Jake mused. "What if we redirect it?" Corvain's eyes widened. "Redirect it? The cascade failure is pure destruction. How could one redirect such a force? Same way you deal with a feedback loop in a power core. You don't fight it. You give it somewhere else to go." Jake was already pulling components from his spare parts bins. "I'm going to need some of her biocompatible materials. And I'm going to need you to trust me to do things that probably violate every safety protocol your people have ever written." As Lyralii's breathing grew shallower, Jake began assembling something that no engineer in galactic history had ever attempted. A hybrid device that would bridge the gap between alien biology and human mechanical genius. If it worked, it would save her life. If it failed, it would probably kill them all. But Jake Morrison had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with enough creativity and determination. Tonight, he would find out if that philosophy extended to saving the life of a dying dragon. Jake's hands moved with practiced precision as he sorted through Corvain's medical supplies. The dragon's ship had indeed carried equipment from a dozen worlds, but most of it was designed for traditional healing approaches. Jake needed something different, something that could interface between organic systems and mechanical ones. "These neural interface crystals," Jake said, holding up a cluster of gems that pulsed with soft light. "They're designed to monitor bioneural activity?" "Yes," Corvain replied, his massive head hovering anxiously over Jake's shoulder. "They provide real-time feedback on matrix harmonics. But They are purely diagnostic. They cannot alter the cascade failure. Maybe not the way your people use them. Jake set the crystals aside and picked up what looked like a metallic mesh. This appears to be some kind of energy conductor. Harmonic stabilization webbing. It is used to maintain proper energy flow during matrix surgery. But Lyraliai's condition is beyond surgery. The cascade has progressed too far. Jake studied the webbing more closely, noting how it seemed to respond to the energy patterns in the room. His workshop was filled with electromagnetic fields from various equipment, and the alien material appeared to be naturally adapting to them. Corvain, what exactly happens during a cascade failure? Walk me through it step by step. The dragon's voice grew heavy with grief as he explained. The bioneural matrix processes life force through harmonic resonance. Each node vibrates at specific frequencies that create a stable energy pattern. When cascade failure occurs, usually due to massive trauma or energy overload, one node begins resonating at a chaotic frequency. This chaos spreads to adjacent nodes, and within hours, the entire matrix becomes unstable. Like a computer virus spreading through a network, Jake muttered. Except instead of corrupting data, it's corrupting life force itself. An crude but accurate analogy, Corvain admitted. Jake pulled out his tablet and began sketching a diagram. So we have a biological network with nodes that should vibrate harmoniously, but instead one or more nodes are creating chaotic patterns that spread throughout the system. Precisely. Our healers attempt to restore harmonic balance through meditation and energy manipulation, but once cascade failure reaches critical mass, such methods are insufficient. That's because you're fighting the problem instead of redirecting it. Jake continued sketching, his engineering mind visualizing the solution. In mechanical systems, when you have chaotic resonance, you don't try to force it back into harmony. You create a deliberate dissonance that cancels out the chaos. Corvain's amber eyes grew wide. You speak of deliberately introducing more chaos into an already failing system? Not chaos. Controlled counter-resonance. Jake set down his tablet and walked over to Lyraliai. Her silver scales had begun to dim, and her breathing was becoming more labored. They were running out of time. I need to map her matrix patterns first. Can your monitoring equipment interface with my diagnostic tools? Working together, they connected alien and human technology in ways that made Corvain repeatedly express amazement. Jake's diagnostic scanners, designed for mechanical systems, somehow managed to interface with the dragon's biomonitoring crystals. The hybrid readings that resulted painted a picture that no healer in galactic history had ever seen. Incredible, Corvain breathed as data flowed across Jake's screens. You are visualizing her life force as if it were electrical current. Because at a fundamental level, that's what it is. Energy following pathways, creating patterns, maintaining systems. Jake pointed at the chaotic spikes on his displays. Look at these readings. The cascade isn't random. It's following specific pathways through a matrix. Our healers have always seen cascade failure as pure chaos. Because they're looking at it wrong. This isn't chaos. It's a very complex pattern that's incompatible with her normal biorhythm. Jake was already pulling components from his parts bins. If I can create an artificial resonance generator that produces the exact opposite of this pattern, you would create destructive interference, Corvain finished, his voice filled with growing excitement. The chaotic resonance would cancel itself out. Exactly. But the tricky part is making sure the counter-resonance doesn't damage your healthy matrix nodes. Jake began assembling what looked like a hybrid between alien technology and human electronics. This is going to require some very precise calibration. As Jake worked, Corvain found himself marveling at the human's approach. Dragon healers were trained in ancient traditions, following prescribed methods that had been refined over millennia. But Jake approached Lyraliai's condition like any other engineering problem, applying principles from completely unrelated fields to create novel solutions. The harmonics generator will need to be surgically implanted near her primary matrix cluster, Jake explained as he soldered connections between alien crystals and human circuit boards. It'll monitor her biorhythm in real time and produce counter-resonance patterns to neutralize the cascade failure. Such a device has never been attempted. The risks are no greater than letting her die. Jake looked up from his work. Corvain, I need you to understand something. This is experimental technology created by someone with no formal training in dragon biology. It might work, it might not, but doing nothing guarantees she dies. Corvain was quiet for a long moment, studying his mate's fading form. When I first heard stories of human ingenuity, I thought they were exaggerations. Your kind's reputation for achieving the impossible seemed like folklore. Maybe it is folklore. Maybe I'm just too stubborn to accept that some things can't be fixed. Jake made a final connection and held up the completed device. It was an odd mixture of crystalline alien technology and human electronics, pulsing with soft light as various components interface with each other. It is ready? The hardware is ready. But I need to program it with the specific counter-resonance patterns for Lyraliai's unique biosignature. Jake connected the device to his diagnostic equipment. This is where things get really experimental. For the next hour, Jake worked with an intensity that impressed even Corvain. The human's fingers danced across multiple interfaces, analyzing Lyraliai's deteriorating matrix patterns and calculating the precise frequencies needed to counteract them. It was mathematics and engineering applied to living biology, an approach that would have been considered heretical by traditional healers. There, Jake said finally, leaning back from his equipment. The device is programmed with counter-resonance patterns specific to her current cascade failure. But there's one more component we need. What component? Jake picked up a human power cell, one designed for emergency equipment. Dragon biotechnology is amazing, but it's designed to work with life force, not electrical power. This device needs a hybrid power source that can bridge both energy types. Using human power cells to augment dragon biotechnology, Corvain mused. Our engineers would call such a concept impossible. Good thing I'm not one of your engineers. Jake began modifying the power cell, adding connectors that would allow it to interface with the harmonic stabilization webbing. This should provide stable power while the device learns to work with her natural life force. As Jake made final preparations, Lyraliai's condition continued to deteriorate. Her scales had lost most of their silver luster, and her breathing had become so shallow that Corvain had to lean close to detect it. We must proceed immediately, Corvain said urgently. She has perhaps minutes remaining. Jake nodded grimly. Then, let's find out if human stubbornness is stronger than dragon cascade failure. The surgical chamber that Jake had improvised in his workshop bore no resemblance to any medical facility in galactic space. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the hybrid array of human and dragon technology. Lyraliai lay motionless on a padded platform, her life signs so weak they barely registered on the monitoring equipment. The implantation must be precise, Corvain said, his massive claws surprisingly gentle as he indicated the location on Lyraliai's chest where a primary matrix cluster resided. Even a minor error in placement could cause irreversible damage. Jake studied the bioscans one more time. The counter-resonance device was small enough to fit in his palm, but its placement would determine whether Lyraliai lived or died. According to the readings, her matrix cluster was located just beneath a cluster of silver scales, protected by natural bioarmor that had evolved over millions of years. I'll need to create an access port without damaging the surrounding tissue, Jake said, selecting a cutting tool designed for precision work on delicate electronics. Your people's medical scanners should guide me to the exact location. You understand that if this procedure fails, you will have attempted something no being in galactic history has ever tried, Corvain said quietly. And if I don't try, someone dies who doesn't deserve to. Jake powered up the cutting tool, adjusting its settings for biological tissue. Sometimes the choice between failure and regret is easy to make. The first incision was the most difficult thing Jake had ever done. His hands, steady enough to repair hyperdrive cores and calibrate atmosphere processors, trembled slightly as he worked on living flesh. But Lyraliai's bioarmor parted cleanly under the precision cutter, revealing the crystalline structure of her matrix cluster beneath. Remarkable, Corvain breathed as Jake exposed the dragon's bioneural core. You work with such confidence despite never having seen dragon anatomy before. Anatomy is anatomy. Systems are systems. Jake was studying the exposed matrix cluster, comparing it to his scans. The cascade failure was visible even to the naked eye, chaotic energy patterns flickering through the crystal nodes like corrupted data streams. The real test comes now. Jake carefully positioned the counter-resonance device adjacent to the primary matrix cluster. The hybrid technology felt warm in his hands as alien crystals interfaced with human electronics. According to his calculations, the device should begin producing counterharmonics within seconds of activation. Initiating power sequence, Jake announced, activating the human power cell that would provide initial energy to the system. The device hummed to life, its various components synchronizing as programmed. For a moment, nothing happened. The cascade failure continued its destructive resonance through Lyraliai's matrix, and her life signs remained critically low. Jake began to wonder if his calculations had been wrong, if the theoretical foundation for his approach was fundamentally flawed. Then, the counter-resonance began. The device started producing harmonic frequencies that were the exact opposite of the cascade failure patterns. Where chaotic energy had been destroying matrix nodes, controlled dissonance began canceling out the destructive resonance. It was like watching two waves crash into each other and disappear. "It is working," Corvain said in amazement. "The cascade is losing strength." Jake monitored the readings carefully. The counter-resonance was effective, but it needed fine-tuning. The device was designed to adapt to changing conditions, learning Lyraliai's biopatterns and adjusting its output accordingly. But that adaptation process would take time they might not have. Her matrix is stabilizing in sectors 7 through 12. Jake reported, watching as healthy harmonic patterns began replacing chaotic ones. But the cascade is still active in the peripheral nodes. Can your device reach those areas? Give it time. The counter-resonance will spread through her matrix the same way the cascade failure did, but in reverse. Jake was already making adjustments to the device's programming, optimizing its learning algorithms for dragon biotechnology. This is where human technology really shines. Adaptability. As they watched, the counter-resonance began expanding its influence throughout Lyraliai's bioneural matrix. The cascade failure, faced with systematic opposition for the first time in its destructive existence, began to weaken. Matrix nodes that had been dark with chaotic energy started flickering back to stable harmonic patterns. Her life signs are strengthening, Corvain reported, his voice filled with hope. Respiratory function is improving. Neural activity is increasing. Jake nodded, but remained focused on the technical readings. The counter-resonance was working, but the process was delicate. Too much interference, and he could damage healthy matrix nodes. Too little, and the cascade failure might reassert itself. The device is learning her biopatterns faster than I expected, Jake observed as the hybrid technology adapted to Lyraliai's unique life force signature. Dragon matrix systems are incredibly sophisticated. The device is having to evolve its algorithms in real time just to keep up. You speak as if the device is alive. In a way, it is. I incorporated adaptive learning protocols from human AI research. The device doesn't just produce counter-resonance. It learns how to produce better counter-resonance. Jake made another adjustment to the power distribution. It's becoming smarter with each passing minute. The breakthrough came suddenly. Jake's monitors showed a cascade of changes as the counter-resonance finally reached critical mass. The remaining cascade failure patterns collapsed all at once, overwhelmed by systematic harmonic interference. Lyraliai's bioneural matrix snapped back in a stable configuration like a rubber band released from tension. Matrix stability achieved, Jake announced, hardly believing his own readings. The cascade failure has been completely neutralized. Lyraliai's eyes opened for the first time in hours. The luminous gaze that had been fading toward darkness now blazed with renewed life force. Her scales began regaining their silver luster, and her breathing deepened into strong, regular patterns. "Corvain," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. The massive dragon's response was immediate and emotional. He lowered his great head to nuzzle his mate gently, careful not to disturb the still-active counter-resonance device. "I am here, light of my stars. You are safe." Lyraliai's gaze found Jake, and her expression filled with wonder. "You are the human mechanic, the one who repairs impossible things. Just someone who doesn't know when to give up," Jake replied, continuing to monitor the device's function. "The counter-resonance generator needs to remain active for at least another few hours to ensure the cascade failure doesn't reassert itself. But your bioneural matrix is stable now." "How is this possible?" Lyraliai asked, studying the hybrid device that had saved her life. "Our greatest healers declared my condition incurable because they were thinking like healers instead of engineers," Jake explained. "They saw a biological problem that required a biological solution. I saw an energy management problem that could be solved with the right technology." Corvain's amber eyes were bright with amazement and gratitude. "You have achieved something our entire medical community believed impossible. You have created technology that bridges the gap between life and machinery." Jake shrugged, beginning to clean up his improvised surgical area. "Every problem has a solution. You just have to be willing to look beyond conventional approaches. Your people are brilliant, but they're limited by their own expertise. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what's really possible." As Lyraliai's strength returned, Jake found himself contemplating the broader implications of what they had accomplished. The counter-resonance device wasn't just a medical breakthrough. It was proof that human and dragon technology could work together in ways that neither species had ever imagined. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Do I need to keep monitoring the device?" "The device appears to be functioning autonomously," Corvain observed, studying the readouts. "It has learned her biopatterns sufficiently to maintain stable counter-resonance without external guidance." "Good. That means it can be replicated." Jake was already thinking about improvements and modifications. Other dragons with cascade failure could be treated using similar devices, customized for their specific biosignatures. The implications of that statement hung in the air like the echo of distant thunder. Jake Morrison, a human mechanic working in a converted warehouse, had not just saved one life. He had potentially revolutionized dragon medicine forever. 3 days after the successful surgery, Jake's workshop had become the center of unprecedented attention. Word of Lyraliai's recovery had spread through dragon society with lightning speed, and representatives from the Celestial Reach were arriving hourly to witness what they were calling the impossible healing. Jake found the attention overwhelming. He was used to working alone, solving problems in quiet solitude. Now, his workshop buzzed with dragons, alien medical specialists, and even a few human scientists who had heard rumors of the breakthrough. "The biointegration is remarkable," Dr. Sarachon observed as she studied the latest scans of Lyraliai's matrix. The human xenobiologist had arrived from the core worlds the day before, drawn by reports that defied everything she knew about dragon physiology. The counter-resonance device has become fully integrated with her bioneural matrix. It's not just treating her condition anymore. It's become part of her. Lyraliai, now strong enough to move around the workshop, examined her reflection in a polished metal panel. The hybrid device was barely visible beneath her silver scales, but its presence could be felt in the stable, powerful rhythm of her life force. "I feel stronger than I did before the cascade failure," she said wonderingly. "The device is not merely maintaining stability. It is optimizing my matrix function." Corvain nodded thoughtfully. "The human's creation has evolved beyond its original purpose. It learns continuously, finding new ways to enhance rather than simply preserve." Jake looked up from his workbench, where he was assembling components for a second counter-resonance device. A young dragon named Thaxus had arrived that morning with early-stage cascade failure, and Jake was preparing to attempt his second miracle. That's the beauty of adaptive technology, Jake explained as he calibrated crystalline components. I designed the device to learn and improve. What I didn't expect was how quickly it would advance beyond my original programming. Dr. Chen shook her head in amazement. Jake, do you understand what you've accomplished? You've created the first successful biomechanical interface between human technology and dragon physiology. This could revolutionize medicine across dozens of species. I just fixed a problem, Jake replied, though he was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. The fact that it has broader applications is a bonus. Elder Vorthak, the most senior dragon healer to visit the workshop, approached Jake with careful reverence. His ancient scales were deep gold marked with silver patterns that spoke of centuries of wisdom and experience. Human Jake Morrison, Vorthak said formally, I have practiced the healing arts for 800 years. I have trained under masters whose knowledge spans millennia. Yet in 3 days, you have achieved what our entire profession believed impossible. With respect, Elder Vorthak, maybe that's exactly why I could do it, Jake replied as he continued his work. I wasn't limited by knowledge of what was supposed to be impossible. You speak truth that cuts deeper than we care to admit, Vorthak acknowledged. Our mastery has become our limitation. We know so much about how things should work that we cannot see how they could work differently. Thaxus, the young dragon awaiting treatment, listened to the conversation with growing hope. His cascade failure was still in its early stages, caught before it had progressed to the critical level that had nearly killed Lyralii. Will the procedure be the same? Thaxus asked nervously. Similar, but not identical, Jake explained, showing him the new device he was assembling. Each counter-resonance generator has to be customized for the specific biosignature of its recipient. Your matrix patterns are different from Lyralii's, so your device needs different programming. Dr. Chen studied Jake's work with professional fascination. The level of customization you're achieving is incredible. You're essentially creating bespoke medical technology in real time. It's not that different from repairing custom starship modifications, Jake said. Every job requires a unique solution based on a specific problem and available resources. As Jake worked, Corvain found himself reflecting on the broader implications of the human's achievement. Dragon society prized ancient wisdom and traditional approaches. The idea that a young mechanic from an upstart species could surpass their greatest healers challenged fundamental assumptions about knowledge and expertise. Jake, Corvain said thoughtfully, your success here will force my people to reconsider many things we thought we knew about medicine, technology, and the nature of problem-solving itself. Change isn't always comfortable, Jake replied, making final adjustments to Thaxus's device. But it's usually necessary. The second surgery went even more smoothly than the first. Jake's technique had improved, and his understanding of dragon bioneural matrices had deepened through hands-on experience. The counter-resonance device for Thaxus activated successfully within minutes, immediately beginning its work of neutralizing the cascade failure. Remarkable, Elder Vorthak observed as they watched Thaxus's matrix stabilize. The human's methods improve with each application. He learns as quickly as his devices do. That's how humans work, Dr. Chen explained. We adapt rapidly to new situations, building on previous experience to tackle increasingly complex challenges. Over the following days, more dragons arrived seeking treatment. Each case taught Jake something new about dragon biology, and each successful procedure refined his techniques further. The workshop became an impromptu medical center, filled with healing dragons and amazed observers. But it was the conversations between procedures that proved most enlightening. Dragons who had lived for centuries shared stories of other impossible problems that had stumped their greatest minds. Jake found himself sketching solutions to challenges that had persisted for generations. The atmospheric recyclers on our colony ships operate at only 60% efficiency, mentioned Corvain during one discussion. Our engineers say the design cannot be improved further. Jake looked up from his work with interest. What's limiting the efficiency? Harmonic interference between the processing crystals. The interactions create energy waste that our technology cannot eliminate. Sounds like another counter-resonance problem, Jake mused. Have you considered using deliberate dissonance to cancel out the harmonic interference? The conversation that followed would eventually lead to a complete revolution in dragon atmospheric technology. But in the moment, Jake was simply doing what came naturally to him, seeing problems as puzzles to be solved rather than limitations to be accepted. Lyralii, now fully recovered and serving as Jake's unofficial assistant, watched these exchanges with growing amazement. You realize you are casually solving engineering problems that have challenged our best minds for centuries. Problems are just problems, Jake replied, focusing on the delicate calibration of another counter-resonance device. Species and tradition don't matter when it comes to finding solutions. What matters is being willing to try approaches that others haven't considered. Elder Vorthak, who had initially come to witness the impossible healing, found himself staying to learn about the impossible thinking that made such healings possible. Human Jake Morrison, he said one evening as they worked late, you are teaching us something more valuable than medical techniques. You're teaching us to question our assumptions about what is possible. Maybe that's the real breakthrough here, Jake agreed. Not the technology, but the willingness to believe that every problem has a solution, even if no one has found it yet. As word of Jake's successes spread beyond dragon society, representatives from other species began arriving at the workshop. The human mechanic who had saved a dying dragon was becoming the human mechanic who challenged the very nature of impossibility itself. 6 months after Lyralii's miraculous recovery, the once quiet workshop on New Phoenix Station had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a center for impossible solutions. What had started as a desperate plea from a dying dragon had evolved into a revolution in thinking that was reshaping how multiple species approach their most challenging problems. Jake stood before the newly constructed medical wing of his facility, watching as teams of human, dragon, and other alien specialists work together on projects that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The integration wasn't always smooth. Different species had radically different approaches to problem solving, but the results spoke for themselves. The Zeridian crystalline plague has been completely eliminated, Dr. Chen reported as she reviewed the latest statistics. 37 worlds that were facing extinction now have stable populations again, all because you applied your counter-resonance principles to crystalline biology. And the Corvin energy storms that have been devastating their colonies for decades, asked Lyralii, who had become Jake's chief liaison with Dragon Society. Neutralized using harmonic interference generators, Jake replied, though he seemed more focused on the technical readouts than the praise. Same basic principle as the bioneural cascade treatment, just scaled up for atmospheric phenomena. Corvain approached with a datapad containing reports from across the galaxy. The Galactic Medical Council has officially recognized the Morrison protocols as standard treatment for 17 previously incurable conditions. Species that had given up hope are now sending delegations to learn your methods. Jake shrugged, still uncomfortable with the attention. The methods aren't that complicated. Look at problems differently, combine technologies in new ways. Don't accept that something is impossible just because it's never been done before. Simple to say, difficult to implement, observed Elder Vorthak, who had become a permanent resident of the facility. At 800 years old, he was learning to think like a human mechanic, and the experience was transforming his understanding of healing. Our species spent millennia perfecting traditional approaches. Abandoning them requires courage we did not know we lacked. The transformation hadn't been limited to medical applications. Jake Workshop had become a magnet for engineers, scientists, and problem solvers from across known space. The human approach to technical challenges, combining disparate technologies, ignoring conventional limitations, and treating failure as a learning opportunity rather than a dead end, was proving revolutionary. The Altarian shipyards want to implement your hybrid construction techniques, Corvain reported. They claim your methods could reduce construction time by 70% while improving ship durability. Have they tested the structural integration protocols? Jake asked, looking up from his current project, a device designed to stabilize quantum fluctuations in Paxron energy cores. Extensively. Their engineers initially resisted combining bio-grown materials with synthetic composites, but the test results were undeniable. Jake nodded absently. The success stories were gratifying, but he remained focused on the work itself. Each new challenge revealed fresh possibilities for cross-species technological integration. The barriers between different approaches to science and engineering were proving more permeable than anyone had imagined. Dr. Sarah Chun paused in her work to study Jake with professional curiosity. You realize what you've started here goes far beyond individual technical solutions? You're demonstrating that human cognitive flexibility might be our species' most valuable contribution to galactic civilization. Every species contributes something unique, Jake replied diplomatically. Dragons have incredible longevity and deep wisdom. Zeridians have crystalline biology that interfaces naturally with energy systems. Altarians can grow materials with properties we can barely understand. Humans just happen to be good at combining things that aren't supposed to work together. Modest as always, Lyralii said with affection. The dragon who saved me would have died without your refusal to accept conventional limitations. The workshop's main display screen activated, showing an incoming transmission from the Galactic Research Consortium. The alien figure on the screen was a Valdorian, a species known for their mathematical precision and conservative approach to scientific advancement. Jake Morrison of the human species, the Valdorian, began formally. I am Senior Researcher KEX-9. The consortium has reviewed your published methodologies and the results of your various interventions across 17 systems. Okay, Jake replied cautiously, unsure where this was heading. Our analysis indicates that your approach to problem-solving represents a fundamental paradigm shift with implications for every field of scientific endeavor. The consortium wishes to propose a formal collaboration to document and disseminate your methodologies throughout consortium space. Jake looked around at his assembled friends and colleagues. What exactly would that involve? Establishment of Morrison Protocol training centers on 50 worlds. Recruitment of promising individuals from multiple species for cross-training in human problem-solving methodologies. Development of standardized procedures for applying your approaches to new challenges. You want to teach people to think like humans? Jake asked, somewhat amused by the concept. We want to teach them to think beyond the limitations of their traditional education, KEX-9 clarified. Your successes demonstrate that breakthrough solutions often require abandoning conventional wisdom in favor of creative synthesis. Elder Vorthak spoke up from across the room. Senior Researcher KEX-9, I have observed the human's methods closely for many months. What he accomplishes cannot be reduced to simple procedures. His approach requires a fundamental willingness to challenge one's most basic assumptions about how the universe works, which is precisely why formal training is necessary, KEX-9 replied. Left to informal transmission, these methods will reach only a tiny fraction of those who could benefit from them. Jake found himself considering the proposal seriously. The idea of sharing his approaches with beings across the galaxy was both exciting and daunting, but the potential benefits were undeniable. I want to maintain hands-on involvement, Jake said finally. This isn't about creating a bureaucracy around problem-solving. It's about teaching people to see possibilities where they previously saw only limitations. Agreed. You would serve as Director of Applied Innovation, with authority to shape the program according to your vision. As the conversation continued, Lyralii moved to stand beside Jake. Her silver scales now bore faint patterns where the counter-resonance device had integrated with her bioneural matrix, a permanent reminder of a night that had changed everything. From a single desperate journey to your workshop to this, she said quietly. Did you ever imagine your willingness to help a dying dragon would lead to galactic transformation. Jake smiled, watching through the window as teams of diverse beings worked together on projects that would have been impossible for any single species to tackle alone. I just fixed a problem. Everything else grew naturally from that decision. Perhaps that is the most human thing of all, Corvain observed, joining their conversation. Seeing universe-changing implications as simply the natural result of doing what needs to be done. As night fell over New Phoenix Station, Jake Morrison, former mechanic, current miracle worker, prepared to embark on a new chapter of impossible solutions. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless problems waiting for someone stubborn enough to believe they could be solved. And if there was one thing the past 6 months had proven, it was that human stubbornness, properly applied, could indeed move mountains. Or in this case, save dying dragons and transform civilizations in the process. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges that would require everything Jake had learned about combining the impossible with the inevitable. But then, again, that had always been his specialty. He just hadn't realized until now that it might be humanity's specialty as well.